She's the real daughter, and this family needs to celebrate real blood. Those were the exact 9 words my mother-in-law, Brenda, pronounced into the heavy, quiet air of Losteria's private dining room on a humid Thursday afternoon. She didn't whisper them. She didn't drop her voice to shield me from the embarrassment. She stood in the center of the room holding the master organizer clipboard, the exact clipboard I had personally purchased, organized, and filled with color-coded vendor contracts over 6 weeks of late-night planning, and looked me straight in the eyes without a single flicker of hesitation or shame. I was 7 months pregnant with my first child, a baby girl named Maya, whom my husband David and I had spent 2 long, painful years praying for, planning for, and desperately trying to conceive. Standing directly to Brenda's right, her arms folded tightly over a lavender cardigan, was my 32-year-old sister-in-law, Clara. Clara was unmarried, chronically unemployed, and living in an apartment she didn't pay for. Yet there she stood, beaming with the distinct, untouchable smugness of a person who had spent her entire existence being handed trophies for races she never even ran. Just 15 minutes prior, I had walked into Losteria expecting to conduct a final walkthrough with Brenda and my father-in-law, Arthur. We were supposed to double-check the seating arrangement, finalize the balance for the artisanal dessert tower, and confirm the arrival times for my side of the family. Instead, I walked into a room that had been completely redecorated. The custom gold-lettered banner that was supposed to read "Welcome Baby Maya" had been torn down and stuffed into a black trash bag sitting near the kitchen doors. In its place hung a freshly painted pastel sign, "Welcome Clara's Blessing." When I demanded to know what was going on, Brenda didn't apologize. She pulled out a printed guest list, produced a thick, purple permanent marker from her purse, drawn a jagged, aggressive line straight through my name at the top of the sheet, and written Clara's name in giant block letters over it. "We transferred your venue deposit to Clara's adoption announcement party," Brenda said, her tone as matter-of-fact as if she were reading a weather forecast. "You're still welcome to sit in the back as a guest, of course. But Clara is finally adopting, and this family needs to prioritize real milestones. You can always have another shower for your next baby, Elena. But Clara needs to feel prioritized right now." Standing there in my compression stockings, feeling the heavy, rhythmic kick of my baby girl against my ribs, I watched my in-laws casually erase 7 months of my life to build a pedestal for a woman who treated everyone around her like disposable leverage. What Brenda and Clara didn't realize, what none of them in that room understood, was that they hadn't just stolen a party. They had opened a vault they lacked the legal power to close. To comprehend how a family reaches a state of moral decay, where they can casually strip a heavily pregnant woman of her own baby shower without a second thought, you have to understand the toxic hierarchy that existed in the Miller household long before I ever entered the frame. David is the middle child of Arthur and Brenda Miller, but for all practical purposes, he was raised as a human utility bill. His father, Arthur, was a former regional logistics manager who took an early retirement in his mid-50s due to a chronic, vague lower back ailment, a condition that miraculously only flared up whenever manual labor, financial responsibility, or household upkeep was required of him. His mother, Brenda, was a woman whose entire identity was built around projecting an image of country club elegance to her local social circle while managing a household budget that was perpetually teetering on the edge of insolvency. And then, sitting comfortably at the apex of their entire existence, was Clara. Clara was the eldest, the golden child, the perpetual victim, and the undisputed sun around which the entire Miller solar system revolved. If Clara failed out of a semester in college, it wasn't because she spent her nights partying and skipping lectures, it was because the university's academic structure was rigid and unsupportive of creative minds. If Clara lost a marketing job after 3 months, it wasn't because she was habitually late and hostile to her managers, it was because the workplace culture was inherently toxic. If Clara blew up a long-term relationship, it was because the man was intimidated by a strong, independent woman. For over 3 decades, Arthur and Brenda had shielded Clara from every single consequence, financial penalty, and reality of adult life. They absorbed her debts, excused her cruelty, and blamed the rest of the world for her shortcomings. I met David 8 years ago. At the time, I was working as a mid-level financial analyst for a major commercial real estate firm in the city. I came from a radically different background. My father was a high school mathematics teacher who taught me how to analyze compound interest and balance sheets before I even learned how to drive a car, and my mother ran a small, highly efficient custom tailoring shop out of our home. I was raised in an environment where every single dollar had a purpose, where emotional outbursts never overruled structural facts, and where discipline wasn't considered a punishment, but a baseline requirement for freedom. When David and I began dating, I saw the structural bleeding immediately. David was a brilliant structural engineer, working 60 hours a week designing commercial foundations, yet he was living in a dark, cramped studio apartment and driving a car with a slipping transmission. Why? Because he was secretly paying $400 a month toward Clara's auto insurance, covering his parents' quarterly property tax installments because Arthur forgot to set aside his pension money, and sending cash to his sister every time her freelance art ventures inevitably collapsed. David was being squeezed dry by a parasitic family dynamic that convinced him his only value lay in what he could provide for Clara and his parents. They kept him perpetually drained, so he would never have the financial freedom to build a life independent of their demands. I didn't throw a public tantrum, nor did I demand that David cut his family off on our second anniversary. Instead, I did what my training had prepared me to do. I systematically reorganized his financial architecture. Within 2 years of our marriage, I took over our household financial management. I established firm, impenetrable boundaries on David's personal accounts. I set up automated investment pipelines, high-yield savings vehicles, and legal trusts for our future family. Under my financial guidance, David transitioned into a senior consulting role that doubled his annual compensation. On my end, my career trajectory skyrocketed. By 32, I was promoted to Senior Director of Asset Management at Vanguard Asset Holdings LLC, overseeing a regional portfolio of commercial plazas, corporate leases, and multifamily residential developments valued in the tens of millions. 4 years ago, when the regional housing market experienced a sharp local dip, I decided to execute a calculated personal investment strategy. Using my premarital savings, performance bonuses, and a private line of credit secured entirely in my own name, I purchased a distressed, historic 3-unit residential property near the revitalized downtown district. I placed the property under an independent holding vehicle, Vanguard Asset Holdings LLC, with myself listed as the sole managing member. I spent 6 months renovating the units, turning the property into a high cash flow asset. Then, 2 years later, Clara suffered another one of her signature catastrophic life resets. She abruptly quit her job, broke off an engagement with a decent, hard-working man because he refused to buy her an outrageously expensive engagement ring, and declared to the family that she was moving back to the city to reclaim her spiritual center. Predictably, Brenda and Arthur came running to David and me. Brenda wept openly at our dinner table, dabbing her eyes with a cloth napkin as she pleaded for help. Clara had no job, no savings, a ruined credit score, and nowhere to live. Arthur claimed his medical expenses were swallowing their pension, making it impossible for them to take her into their house. I made a cold, calculated business decision. I agreed to let Clara move into Unit B of my downtown residential property. I didn't offer her the apartment out of deep affection for Clara. I did it because I loved my husband, and I wanted to insulate David from the relentless, daily harassment of his parents' financial begging. But I was not naive. I didn't hand Clara the keys on a silver platter, or rely on verbal promises. I had my firm's corporate legal counsel draft a standardized, legally binding corporate lease agreement through my LLC. The rent was set at $1,250 a month, a heavy discount from the $1,850 market rate, payable strictly on the first calendar day of each month. Brenda wept tears of profound gratitude that evening. She hugged me tightly, calling me a godsend and a blessing to this family. Arthur shook my hand firmly, swearing on his honor that they would never forget the incredible generosity I had shown their daughter. For 3 years, Clara resided in Unit B. She rarely paid her rent on time. Almost every month, Brenda would quietly transfer funds from Arthur's account to cover Clara's balance, keeping up the fragile domestic illusion that Clara was a self-sufficient, successful adult woman. I permitted the arrangement to continue because the overall property was appreciating significantly, the remaining 2 units were fully occupied by high-paying corporate tenants, and the buffer kept Clara entirely out of our personal lives. Then, 7 months ago, I tested positive on a home pregnancy test. David wept tears of pure joy when I showed him the test result. After 2 years of fertility struggles, tests, and anxiety, we were finally going to be parents. When we officially announced the pregnancy at a Sunday family dinner, the contrast in reactions was stark. My parents, whom we called later that evening, blew up with excitement, immediately asking how they could help prepare the nursery. Brenda, on the other hand, offered a tight, brief smile, placed her fork down, looked over at Clara, and immediately shifted the entire dinner conversation toward Clara's recent decision to apply as a single applicant for a private foster-to-adopt placement program. It is just so much more noble when a woman chooses to bring a child into the world entirely on her own terms, Brenda declared loudly over dessert, stroking Clara's arm. No shortcuts through standard marriage or traditional setups. Clara is taking the brave, heroic path. That is the kind of courage this family truly respects. I said nothing. I had a high-stress executive job, a complex commercial portfolio to manage, and a high-risk pregnancy to monitor. I did not need Brenda's validation, nor did I seek Clara's approval. What I did require, however, was an organized, elegant baby shower to celebrate the upcoming birth of our daughter with my colleagues, my personal friends, and my side of the family. Because I knew Brenda's organizational habits were chaotic at best, I took complete ownership of planning the event. I researched venues, selected L'Osteria for its private courtyard dining space, finalized a custom catering package, and paid the $1,500 non-refundable venue deposit out of my personal checking account. The only minor task I assigned to Brenda was keeping track of physical RSVP cards from David's extended family, simply to ensure she felt included in the process. Delegating even that tiny slice of responsibility to Brenda was a monumental mistake. Giving my mother-in-law administrative foothold was like handing an arsonist a box of matches near dry timber. Now, to be completely fair and objective, emotional tension surrounding family dynamics during major life transitions is not entirely uncommon. It is completely understandable that parents often feel an overwhelming urge to protect and compensate for a child who has continuously struggled, trailed behind, or faced hardship in adult life. Furthermore, Clara's decision to pursue single-parent adoption was a significant life step that undoubtedly required preparation, financial commitment, and emotional courage. Had Brenda and Arthur approached David and me with honesty, asking to host a separate, independent dinner or announcement party to celebrate Clara's milestone, David and I would have happily offered our sincere congratulations, attended the event as supportive family members, and even contributed financially toward setting up Clara's prospective nursery space. There is, however, an insurmountable moral divide between lifting up a struggling child and actively destroying another family member's milestone to construct a platform for them. Exploiting my pregnancy, stealing my financial deposit, and publicly degrading my standing in the family were not acts of maternal protection, they were acts of calculated cruelty. The ambush at L'Osteria was not a spontaneous spur-of-the-moment decision, it was a cold, calculated coup executed while my husband was trapped thousands of feet in the air. When Brenda handed me that printed guest list, her purple permanent marker lines aggressively slicing through my name, I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear, nor did I smash any of the lavender-scented centerpieces she had set out. Years of managing complex commercial real estate acquisitions had taught me one fundamental rule of high-stakes conflict: the moment you lose emotional control, you forfeit your structural leverage. I took a slow, deliberate breath, resting one hand gently on top of my stomach. "Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the soft Italian restaurant music with surgical precision. "Let me make sure I have the exact facts straight. You took the $1,500 deposit I paid out of my personal checking account, called the general manager behind my back while impersonating me, and reassigned my private dining room reservation for Clara's adoption announcement." Brenda crossed her arms over her chest, thrusting her chin forward in a defensive posture. "It wasn't just your deposit, Elena. David transferred money to Arthur last month for general family support, so we considered that part of our collective household funds. Besides, Clara has been waiting for her moment in the spotlight for over 10 years. You have a handsome husband, a vice president's salary, a home in the suburbs, and now a natural biological pregnancy. You have everything. Clara has had to fight tooth and nail for every single scrap of happiness in her life. This isn't a competitive sport, Brenda, I replied, shifting my gaze over to Clara. Clara was leaning against the polished mahogany dessert sideboard, holding a glass of sparkling cider. She didn't look flustered or ashamed. Her face radiated pure, unrestrained satisfaction. It's about basic fairness, Elena, Clara chimed in, taking a slow step forward in her designer flats I happened to know she had bought using money borrowed from Arthur. You parade your accomplishments in front of everyone constantly. My foster-to-adopt match was preliminarily approved last week. I deserve to be recognized and celebrated by this family without being pushed into your shadow yet again. Mom and Dad agreed that having two separate large parties in the same month would financially and emotionally strain our relatives. So we consolidated. You didn't consolidate anything, Clara, I said dryly. You hijacked my contract. Arthur stepped into the tension then, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my upper arm. Now, Elena, let's not get overly emotional or dramatic. Excessive stress isn't healthy for the baby. We're actually doing you a major favor here. Organizing a baby shower at 7 months pregnant is exhausting. This way, you don't have to host anything. You just show up, sit back, enjoy the catered appetizers, and let us announce Clara's exciting news to the extended family. We'll even set up a modest side table near the entryway with a small gift box for your baby items. People can leave box diapers or small cards if they feel inclined. They had reduced 7 months of my planned milestone to a cardboard diaper collection box placed near the coat rack at my sister-in-law's party. Did David know about this change? I asked, staring directly into Arthur's eyes. Arthur's eyes twitched for a split second before he cleared his throat. David understands that family comes first. He knows the immense pain Clara has endured over the years. He was lying, and I knew it instantly. David was currently mid-flight on a corporate trip to Chicago for a structural engineering audit, entirely unreachable until his plane touched down later that evening. Brenda and Arthur had deliberately chosen this exact Thursday afternoon walkthrough because they knew David was trapped in the sky. They calculated that without my husband standing beside me, I would buckle under their collective family authority, accept the humiliation quietly, and present a smiling, unified front by the time David's flight landed. I am leaving, I said, picking up my leather handbag from the dining chair. Elena, do not act like a spoiled child. Brenda barked, her calm facade finally cracking as she realized I wasn't weeping or negotiating. If you walk out that door right now, you are disrespecting this entire family. We have already issued the revised digital invitations to David's entire side of the family stating the event is now Clara's announcement party. If you cause a scene or refuse to attend, you will look like a bitter, spiteful sister-in-law. She took 2 steps closer to me, leaning in so close I could smell her heavy floral perfume. She is the real daughter, Elena, Brenda whispered, repeating the words that sealed her fate. You are an in-law. You joined this family through a legal contract. Clara is blood. And when push comes to shove, this family will always choose real blood. I looked at Brenda's hardened face. I looked at Arthur's smug expression. I looked at Clara, who took another victorious sip from her glass. Thank you for finally making the hierarchy crystal clear, I said quietly. I turned on my heel, walked out of the private dining room, and stepped into the afternoon heat. I did not start the car immediately. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV in the far corner of Losteria's parking lot, adjusted the climate control, and pulled out my corporate tablet. My chest was tight, but my head was unnaturally clear. For 8 long years, I had played the accommodating, diplomatic daughter-in-law. I had smoothed over financial disputes, quietly structured David's personal wealth, subsidized Clara's living arrangements, paid off tax bills, and allowed Brenda to take credit for catered holiday dinners I had personally funded. I had swallowed my pride repeatedly under the foolish assumption that patience, generosity, and poise would eventually earn me genuine respect within the Miller family. Brenda's words had shattered that optical illusion. She's the real daughter. You joined this family through a legal contract. If they wanted to operate this family as an absolute blood hierarchy where contracts meant nothing and power was weaponized, it was time to demonstrate what happens when a real corporate contract is fully enforced. My first call was directly to Marcus, the general manager of Losteria, whom I had worked with on prior corporate events. Marcus, it's Elena Miller, I said, my tone crisp, calm, and strictly executive. I am calling regarding the private dining room reservation under my name for this coming Saturday. Oh, hi Elena. Marcus answered, his voice bright before catching a tone of confusion. Is everything going smoothly with the setup? Your mother-in-law mentioned you requested some last-minute structural and thematic updates to the layout. Marcus, I stated plainly. Brenda Miller was never an authorized representative on my master event contract. I personally authorized the $1,500 non-refundable venue deposit using my corporate Visa card ending in 4092. Did she present a written, notarized authorization form signed by me granting her power to modify or transfer my reservation? A heavy, uncomfortable pause stretched over the phone line. No, she assured our staff that she was acting on your behalf as the family matriarch. I am officially revoking and canceling the event reservation in its entirety, I said. I am issuing a formal request for an immediate cancellation and a full refund of my deposit back to my original credit line. Furthermore, I am withdrawing permission for anyone to utilize the private dining space under my booking reference number. Elena, they are literally inside the dining room right now stringing up banners and moving tables, Marcus said, his voice laced with panic. Then you need to walk into that room and inform them that the space is no longer reserved, I replied without a trace of hesitation. If they wish to continue using the facility for their own private event, they will need to execute a new contract and provide their own credit card to cover the $3,500 weekend food and beverage minimum spend requirement. I am emailing you the formal legal cancellation notice right now. Understood, Elena. I am so sorry this happened, Marcus said. I terminated the call, opened my financial portal, and initiated the formal documentation for a merchant chargeback just in case. Phase 1 was complete. By 6:15 p.m., David's flight touched down in Chicago. The moment his phone reconnected to the network, he was greeted by 6 frantic missed calls from his mother and 3 simple text messages from me. Call me the second you step off the plane. Do not speak to your parents first. He called me from the terminal corridor. I did not raise my voice, nor did I indulge in dramatic hyperbole. I gave him a dry, chronologically precise accounting of everything that had occurred at Losteria: the destroyed banners, the purple marker over my name, the misappropriated deposit, and Brenda's explicit declaration that Clara was the real daughter, while I was merely a legal outsider. David remained utterly silent on the other end of the line for 10 agonizing seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling with a quiet, suppressed rage I had never heard from him in our 8 years together. She said those exact words to you, he whispered. She told me I was an in-law who joined the family through a contract, that Clara was real blood, and that my baby shower was downgraded to a diaper box in the hallway of Clara's announcement party, I repeated evenly. And Arthur claimed you explicitly approved the change. I am booking the next flight back home, David said immediately. I'll be on the ground by 9:30 p.m. Do not pick up their calls. When David arrived home that night, the family machinery had already begun its assault. Before David could even set his luggage down in the hallway, his father called his cell phone. David put the call on speakerphone. David. Thank God you're picking up. Arthur boomed, trying desperately to hijack the narrative before David could process the facts. Your wife had an absolute hysterical, emotional breakdown at the restaurant today. She went behind our backs and canceled the entire venue booking right out from under us. Poor Clara was left sobbing in the parking lot. The manager practically marched us out to the curb because nobody had a commercial card on hand to cover a $3,500 room fee. Elena completely destroyed your sister's special day out of pure, unadulterated petty jealousy. David sat down at the kitchen island, staring at the phone with cold, distant eyes. Dad. Did Mom tell Elena that she isn't a real daughter? Arthur stumbled for a fraction of a second. Well, your mother was simply trying to explain the undeniable emotional reality of our family dynamic. Clara is taking a massive, brave leap by adopting as a single mother. She requires our family's complete, undivided support right now. Elena has a massive salary, a high-status corporate job, a husband and a house. She doesn't need a baby shower. Clara needs this win. Elena is carrying my daughter, Dad, David said, his tone dropping an octave, terrifyingly calm. You stripped my wife's event to fund Clara's ego. You lied and told her I authorized it. Do not call this house again tonight. David disconnected the call. But Brenda and Arthur were far from finished. Over the next 48 hours, the Miller Family Network launched a coordinated smear campaign designed to publicly humiliate us into submission. Brenda began calling David's extended network, aunts, uncles, second cousins, and longtime family friends, framing me as an arrogant, cold-hearted corporate bully who had sabotaged a vulnerable, noble single mother's adoption celebration out of personal spite. My phone became a non-stop stream of passive-aggressive, guilt-inducing text messages from David's relatives. Aunt Susan wrote, Elena, we know you come from a wealthy corporate background, but in this family, we support each other. Clara desperately needs this encouragement. Canceling her party over a minor venue misunderstanding is deeply disappointing. Cousin Greg sent a message to the family group chat, honestly shocked that someone would throw a fit over a room reservation when Clara is stepping up to save a child's life. Real family doesn't act like this. Brenda went as far as posting a pointed, melodramatic message on her public social media page. It breaks my heart to see individuals who have been given every material advantage in life attempt to crush those who have suffered for years. Blood is thicker than corporate contracts. True mothers know what really matters. They were orchestrating a social pressuring campaign, banking on the assumption that my fear of public embarrassment and family awkwardness would force David and me to surrender, issue a humble public apology, write a check to cover a new luxury party for Clara, and sweep their cruelty under the rug. They made a fatal error. They forgot that every single comfort they enjoyed was anchored to my ledger. On Saturday morning, while David was outside tending to the yard, I sat down in my home office, opened my high-security laptop, and logged into the primary asset database for Vanguard Asset Holdings LLC. It was time to conduct a complete structural audit of the Miller family. The absolute lowest point of this entire ordeal did not stem from the aggressive text messages, the social media subtext, or the flying monkeys Brenda deployed across state lines. It occurred on Saturday evening, when I walked into our nursery and found David sitting on the floor beside the half-assembled crib, holding a framed ultrasound image of our daughter, Maya. He looked utterly broken. For 32 years, David had been psychologically conditioned by Arthur and Brenda to act as the family's emotional shock absorber and financial safety net. Watching my strong, brilliant husband finally confront the painful truth that his parents genuinely regarded our unborn child as a second-tier grandbaby, an afterthought secondary to Clara's insatiable need for validation, was a profound, quiet heartbreak. They don't care about Maya, Elena, David said softly, his thumb gently tracing the printed black and white curve of our baby's face. They never cared about my milestone. It was always about keeping Clara happy, no matter who they had to crush, bleed, or exploit to do it. I walked over, sat down beside him on the hardwood floor, and took his hand, pressing it against my bump. Right on cue, Maya delivered a firm, powerful kick against his palm. They only possess power over our lives if we continue consenting to play by their rules, David, I said gently. Your mother stood in that restaurant and declared that blood is thicker than contracts. She genuinely believes she can treat me like an interloper, while relying on the very wealth and property I built to keep her daughter housed, and her husband comfortable. David turned his head to look at me, the confusion in his eyes slowly giving way to a cold, hard clarity. What are you planning to do? I reached into my leather tote bag sitting by the nursery door and pulled out a clean, heavy manila folder, placing it flat on the floor between us. Inside were 3 distinct legal notifications drafted by my corporate legal team earlier that morning. For 3 full years, David, I have allowed your sister Clara to reside in Unit B of my downtown residential complex for $600 below market rate out of love and respect for you, I said calmly. For 2 years, I have turned a blind eye to your father using the corporate fuel account linked to my commercial entity for his personal errands. And for 24 months, I have ignored the fact that your mother has failed to pay back a single cent of the $8,000 personal loan I extended to her for her dental reconstructive surgery. I opened the folder, revealing the formal documents inside. They believe I am merely an in-law who joined this family through a flimsy piece of paper, I said, my voice steady and cold. It is time to show them the full, unyielding weight of those paper contracts. David looked down at the documents. Option 1 was a formal 30-day notice to vacate for Unit B, served to Clara Miller for chronic material breaches of her residential lease. Option 2 was an immediate revocation and administrative cancellation of Arthur Miller's corporate fuel card access. Option 3 was a formal legal demand letter for the full repayment of Brenda Miller's defaulted $8,000 loan, complete with the notarized promissory note she had signed in my office 2 years prior. If we execute these, Elena, David said, staring at the paperwork, there is no going back. The family dynamic will be irrevocably broken. Arthur and Brenda broke the family dynamic the moment they tried to sell our daughter's milestone to buy Clara's applause, I responded softly. In 8 weeks, David, our child will enter this world. I refuse to raise her in a family structure where her mother is humiliated, where her father is exploited, and where she is taught that her existence is inferior to her and's demands. We establish the boundary now, or we spend the next 20 years funding Clara's life. David stared at the documents for a long, silent minute. He looked at the ultrasound photo in his hand, then placed his palm back onto my belly as Maya kicked again. Execute every single one of them, David said. On Tuesday morning at precisely 9 a.m., 3 separate process servers and delivery drivers were dispatched across the city to execute the legal strategy. The first delivery was a certified legal notice served directly into Clara's hands at Unit B of my downtown residential property. It was a formal 30-day notice to quit, citing multiple material breaches of her residential lease contract, specifically chronic late rental payments spanning 6 consecutive billing cycles and unauthorized structural modifications to the premises, namely tearing down an interior drywall partition to create a custom nursery space, without landlord approval. Attached to the notice was an itemized financial ledger detailing back rent and late fees totaling $4,200, along with a hard move-out deadline. The second action was an immediate administrative revocation sent from Vanguard Asset Holdings LLC to the corporate fleet management provider. It instantly rendered Arthur's linked company fuel card invalid, while triggering an internal compliance audit for unauthorized personal usage stretching back 24 months. The third delivery was a registered demand letter sent to Brenda and Arthur's primary residence via certified mail with signature required. It contained a copy of the notarized promissory note Brenda had executed 2 years prior for her $8,000 dental work. The letter formally stated that due to missed installment terms, the loan was in default, demanding full remittance of the remaining $7,400 balance within 15 business days to prevent civil litigation. Brenda, Arthur and Clara had operated under the delusion that they were dealing with an emotional, pregnant woman who could be manipulated through family guilt and social shaming. They failed to realize they were dealing with a senior director of asset management enforcing binding legal obligations. At 11:15 a.m., my personal phone began ringing continuously. Clara called 7 times within 15 minutes. Arthur called 4 times. Brenda attempted to dial my number 6 times. I did not answer a single call. I let every ring go straight to voicemail, saving the audio files into a dedicated digital folder labeled legal and financial correspondence. By 1:30 p.m., the family shifted its focus toward David. Brenda called his direct office line, weeping hysterically the second he picked up the receiver. "David, your wife has completely lost her mind," Brenda shrieked, abandoning all pretense of matriarchal dignity. She had a legal process server hand Clara an eviction notice. "Clara is hysterical. She's trying to adopt a child, and now she's being thrown onto the street by your cold, heartless wife. And your father's gas card was declined at the station when he went to pick up his heart medicine. How could you let her treat your own blood like criminals? David kept his voice steady and icy. Mom, Elena didn't lose her mind. She's managing her corporate assets and personal finances. You explicitly told her on Thursday that blood is thicker than contracts, and that she's an outsider who joined this family through a piece of paper. That was just a figure of speech. Brenda yelled. She's family. No, Mom, you made the rules clear, David replied. If Elena is an outsider with no status in this family, then you, Dad, and Clara are simply tenants, borrowers, and cardholders on her business accounts. You cannot treat her like trash when it comes to respect, but claim she's family when you need her money. Put her on the phone. Arthur's voice boomed over the speaker as he snatched the phone from Brenda. David, you tell your wife to drop these ridiculous legal threats right now, or I will disown you. We are coming over to your house right now to settle this face to face. Don't bother coming to our house, Dad, David said cleanly. Elena isn't there. But if you want to discuss the lease and the loan, we can meet at my office conference room at 4 p.m. Bring Clara. David disconnected the call. He texted me the details, and I retrieved my leather portfolio containing every original signed lease, receipt, and ledger. The baseline was established. The glass-walled conference room on the fourth floor of David's engineering firm was bright, quiet, and completely unyielding. David sat at the head of the long oak table, while I sat to his right, my closed leather portfolio resting in front of me. At 4:05 p.m., the glass door burst open. Arthur walked in first, his face red and flushed, followed by Brenda, who looked pale and disheveled, and Clara, whose eyes were red from crying. They walked in expecting an emotional family argument, a screaming match where they could use tears and guilt to force David into submission. Instead, they walked into a formal asset audit. This has gone way too far, Elena, Arthur began, pounding his fist lightly on the oak table. Serving an eviction notice on your own sister-in-law. Sending legal demand letters to your husband's parents. Have you no shame? Sit down, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, absolute tone. Something in my posture made all three of them freeze. They slowly sat in the leather chairs across from us. On Thursday afternoon, I began, opening my portfolio. You, Brenda, and Clara took my $1,500 personal venue deposit, hijacked my baby shower, crossed my name out with a purple marker, and told me that because Clara was real blood, my daughter and I were secondary. Elena, we apologized for how that came across, Brenda started, her hands trembling. You didn't apologize, I interrupted. You launched a smear campaign across the extended family, telling relatives I was selfish and bitter. You posted publicly on social media calling me an outsider. I pulled out Clara's residential lease agreement. Clara, I said, sliding the document across the glass table. You have lived in Unit B for 36 months. Fair market rent is $1,850 a month. I charged you $1,250 a month out of respect for David. That means over 3 years, I personally subsidized your housing by $21,600. Clara stared at the document, her mouth open, unable to speak. During those 36 months, I continued, you were late on rent 16 times. Last month, you knocked down a drywall partition without landlord approval, violating Section 12 of this lease. The 30-day notice to quit stands. You will vacate the premises by the end of next month, or my attorney will file for a formal sheriff-assisted eviction. You can't throw her out. Brenda cried. She's adopting. I can, and I am, I said softly. I pulled out the signed $8,000 promissory note. Brenda, I said, sliding the document toward her. 2 years ago, I lent you $8,000 for your dental implants. You signed a notarized agreement promising $200 monthly repayments. You have made exactly 3 payments in 24 months. The remaining balance of $7,400 is in default. If that balance isn't remitted within 15 days, a civil suit will be filed, and a lien will be placed against your personal vehicle. Brenda turned to Arthur, her voice shaking. Arthur, do something. Arthur stood up, his chair scraping loudly. David. Are you going to sit there and let your wife destroy this family over money? You're my son. David didn't flinch. He leaned forward, rested his hands flat on the table, and looked Arthur straight in the eye. Dad, David said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. Elena isn't destroying this family. You destroyed it the moment you decided my wife and my unborn child were disposable props for Clara's ego. Elena didn't use family money, she used her money to support you for years. You treated her like an outsider, so now she's treating you like a business acquaintance. We're your family, David. Clara sobbed. Blood is thicker than this. David looked at Clara, then at his parents. My wife and my daughter are my family, David said quietly. You made your choice at Losteria. We are simply enforcing it. The room fell completely silent. The guilt trips were ineffective. The golden child hierarchy had run entirely out of leverage. I closed my portfolio with a soft snap. We are finished here. All future communications regarding the lease, the loan, and the corporate audit will go through my attorney. Do not call us, and do not show up at our home. David stood up beside me, took my hand, and walked out of the conference room, leaving Arthur, Brenda, and Clara sitting alone in the quiet glass room. The month following that meeting was the quietest, most peaceful for weeks of my entire pregnancy. Clara moved out of Unit B 3 weeks later. Realizing that I was fully prepared to proceed with a formal court eviction that would permanently stain her rental history and jeopardize her background checks for the adoption agency, she packed her belongings with the help of hired movers paid for by Arthur's savings. The unit was professionally repaired and relisted on the commercial market. Within 10 days, my property firm secured a corporate tenant at full market value, $1,950 a month, increasing my property's net operating income overnight. Brenda and Arthur, facing the genuine threat of a public civil lawsuit, an asset lien, scraped together the $7,400 owed on the dental loan using funds from Arthur's secondary retirement account. The payment was processed through my attorney's escrow account, closing the matter permanently. As for the extended family, the narrative shifted rapidly once the truth came out. When Aunt Susan and Cousin Greg learned that I had personally subsidized Clara's rent by over $20,000 and lent Brenda thousands of dollars without interest, only to have my own baby shower hijacked, the barrage of angry messages stopped completely. 2 of David's aunts sent quiet, apologetic flowers to our home, expressing shock at how Brenda had handled the situation. 2 weeks before my due date, my own mother, along with my closest friends and colleagues, hosted a beautiful baby shower at a local botanical garden glass house. There were no altered banners, no purple markers, and no toxic family politics, just support and genuine celebration for the arrival of our child. On a quiet Tuesday evening in early spring, our daughter, Maya Elena Miller, was born healthy and strong. When David held her for the first time in the hospital room, he had tears streaming down his face. His parents sent a formal congratulatory text message 3 days later, asking if they could visit the hospital to meet their granddaughter. David replied with a simple text, "We are taking time as a family right now. We will let you know if and when we are ready." They were never given unrestricted access again. Boundaries, once broken so severely, are not easily rebuilt. Looking back on that afternoon at Losteria, Brenda's cruel comment was actually the catalyst I needed. She revealed exactly where the boundaries needed to be drawn before my daughter entered the world. She thought that callously dismissing me as an in-law would force me to bow down to family hierarchy. Instead, it reminded me of the legal clarity and independence I held in my own hands. Family isn't defined by an entitlement to exploit those who support you, nor is it created by blood alone when respect is absent. Real family is built on mutual respect and protection. Sometimes, the quietest way to protect your peace is simply to stop subsidizing the people who disrespect you.